Hello, I'd like to welcome you to this edition of Plymouth Profiles. Plymouth Profiles is a local cable show with an opportunity to meet people from the local Plymouth area who are having an impact on the community. And today we're delighted to have a town official who's been with us for 7 years, but this is the first time that she's been on our show. I'd like to welcome the Director of Finance of the town of Plymouth, Lynne Barrett. Lynne, welcome.
Thank you. Welcome.
Nice to have you here.
Thank you.
Now, Lynne, for people that maybe don't know you or don't know about your background, tell us a little bit about your background. Where'd you grow up? What was your education?
Well, I was originally born in Boston and lived with my family in the cities of Brockton, Canton, and then eventually down the Cape. So I spent most of my years growing up down in Brewster on Cape Cod. I went to Bentley College and received a bachelor's degree in accounting from Bentley. I graduated from there and worked for 2 years for a Big 8 public accounting firm, and then left there and went to work for my dad, who was a CPA, and worked for him for 5 years. And he worked in public accounting and auditing cities and towns. And I spent a lot of time in different town halls across Massachusetts, and I really started to enjoy it and liked the atmosphere and the work that I was doing. So when I got married and had a family of my own, I decided that I wanted to settle down and just work in a community. So I started out in the town of East Bridgewater as their town accountant for 1 year. Then I moved to Marshfield and worked for Marshfield for about approximately 10 years as their town accountant. Then I worked in the town of Bourne as their director of finance, and then eventually came to Plymouth almost 7 years ago. And I love this community. It's a great town, and I hope to retire from here.
That's a great background. I know a little bit about Bentley. My cousin attended and graduated from Bentley. He's now an attorney. And I spent part of a summer at Bentley prior to taking the bar exam. The bar review course many years ago was offered at Bentley College.
Oh, really?
Day after day, I would travel to Waltham in order to be at Bentley College and study for the bar exam.
Very good.
It was good.
Well, at Bentley, one of my favorite classes was the business law class. So,
well, it's a great school, a good background. And so you had this background, and how was it that you came to Plymouth when you? Well,
I really enjoyed the town accountant part of the job. I love the municipal finance part of it, but I had been a town accountant for almost probably about 15 years as a town accountant, and really felt like I could contribute more to a community. So I wanted to be a director of finance in charge of or overseeing areas of all the municipal finance. And the Plymouth the job opportunity came up, and I was living in Bridgewater, so I figured the commute wasn't that bad, about 35 minutes. I grew up on the Cape. I used to live in Kingston for 10 years, years ago, so I was very familiar with the area, and have come to Plymouth a lot with my husband and my family to go to the beach or go to the restaurants downtown. So I thought, what a great opportunity to come and work for the town of Plymouth. It's the largest, community in Massachusetts. It's one of the largest, in size, but it's been very exciting. I mean, Plymouth is quite a challenge. There's a lot going on all the time, so you're always busy. It's never boring.
So tell us a little bit about the job description of the Director of Finance for people that don't maybe know about Plymouth government and how it's kind of all set up.
Yeah, the Director of Finance is oversees and works with all of the municipal finance departments, which include the accounting department, which handles payroll, accounts payable, the general ledger aspect, and then I oversee procurement, which handles all the purchasing for the community, and the IT department, information technology, the website, and various access to the community through technology. also the treasurer collector's office, and the assessor's office. So the tax billing process, all of the billing process to the collection process, oversee and work with all of those divisions to make sure that we support the community and the departments and everything that needs to be done.
So many of these departments then report directly to you,
Yes.
the treasurer and so on, and then you report to the town manager?
That's correct.
And you work, and you're one of the department heads then for the town?
Yes, yeah, one of about 10 department heads for the town manager.
And department heads get together regularly?
Yes, we get together every Monday morning, our weekly meeting with the town manager. And I love those meetings because I get to interact with all of my counterparts, and we sort of find out what's going on in everyone's departments. Any changes coming up or any activities that are going on that someone else may need to know about. I think it's really important to have those meetings, and the town manager, has those for us, so it's great.
So how do you interface with the elected officials?
Periodically, it happens probably quite frequently sometimes, but during budget season, we interact with the appointed officials from the advisory and finance committees and all of the capital improvement committees and those kinds of things. And then we interact with the elected officials, the Board of Selectmen, the school committee, the moderator, during the whole budget process, town meeting process, sort of make sure then oversee all the components that go into that to make sure that it's done in a successful manner. So
I recently saw you at a selectmen's meeting that I was attending, so from time to time you go and make presentations.
Yes, yeah, we make presentations on anything from a water and sewer rate hearing, anything that's any financial related matter I'm involved with. So it would include setting of rates for water and sewer, setting of the tax rate, the setting of rates for our curbside and transfer station programs, presentations on major projects that the town may be undertaking, for example, the new town hall project. So I would give presentations to the elected boards, the appointed boards, and to town meeting.
Now, the school department with their budget is separate. Mm-hmm. So what type of interaction, if any, do you have with the school side of government?
Well, we interact quite frequently with the schools. Even though they have a separate budget, it's just another town department budget within the whole town's budget. So, but it's probably the largest piece of the pie, so they play a very critical role, and what the town is thinking, and how we want to provide services to our community. So we work very closely with the school department and with the other departments to come up with goals and objectives for the budget year. Annually, we sit down with sort of the stakeholders at the very beginning of the budget process, which would include the superintendent of schools, the business manager, the chairman of the school committee, also the chairman of the Board of Selectmen, the chairman of the advisory and finance committee, probably one of the vice chairs of the committee, the town manager, myself, to sort of go over, that year's budget and what are our resources, what do we have to work with to be able to build the budget for the following year. So we work really closely together with all those departments.
And do you have any shared expenses or costs? I mean, the one that comes to mind would be insurance.
Yeah, the budget, one of the biggest parts of the budget is the fringe benefits and other shared costs with the school, so health insurance, any other pension, retirement, those types of costs, the shared part of the budget that we work with the school on for that.
And who at the school department would be the counterpoint to you?
I work really closely with Gary Costin, who's the school business manager. He started I think shortly after I did. So he's fairly, we've been around as long together, and we work really well together. Gary also came from the Cape, so he was familiar with a lot of the people that I knew, and we work really well together. And we try to meet on a monthly basis sometimes, just to touch base on what's going on with each of our departments, and because there's a lot of interaction that we do together.
And this is good for the town. I mean, I think we talked off camera. It isn't always true in all communities.
Right, no. I mean, I've worked in several communities where when I was auditing those communities, when I worked for my dad, that sometimes the school department and the town department, they don't get along, and they don't want to share information, or they don't want to work with each other. But on a day-to-day basis, we work very closely with the school department because we both have our payroll departments, we both have accounts payable departments, we both have like a finance department that we work very closely together, even though we're in 2 different locations, but we're constantly interacting with each other through our software because we're all on the same platform. And then I work closely with them, they work closely with us, so sometimes we may be, going back and forth to the 2 different offices, but we work really well together. It works really well.
So I assume your office is really involved with the raising of money by collecting money, taxes and various other charges, and then paying for items. Is there ever any grant writing involved for the town, and if so, who does that?
There is grant writing involved, and the way that it's done right now is each department, say for example the police chief or the fire chief or the director of marine and environmental affairs or the director of the DPW director, they research and look for grants that would be applicable to their departments. They all do a really good job in looking for those grants. We've been very successful in receiving a lot of grants for different projects, especially some of the environmental projects with the Billington Street Dam removal and Plimco projects. But the fire department, he's received grants for purchase of some of the major vehicles that we've bought. In the police department, he's received a lot of grants for dispatch and 911 and those kinds of things. So they're all sort of responsible for looking for those grants on their own, but they've been pretty successful. The school department does their own grant writing also and has received a lot of grants. We're required to be audited every year because of the amount of federal grants that we receive. Anything over $500,000, we're required to be audited. So that we get audited every year because of those grants.
We always receive over $500,000.
Yes, yeah.
Now, again, there's been a lot of talk about 2020 and about getting the town ready, and we see, as we drive throughout town, all types of infrastructure improvements. So to what extent are those improvements being funded by some outside funds or grants, and how did that all come about?
I know that over the last few years, a lot of the projects that you probably see, a lot of the road projects have been long in coming, because a lot of these projects sometimes start like 10 years ago with design and requesting funds, through the state.
So may have been funded by the state.
Yeah, there's a lot of, we receive a lot of money through MassWorks, through the state, and then some of the projects in Plymouth are actually also state projects, which aren't necessarily our projects, but we work very closely with them to get those projects done.
Right.
Exactly, yeah. So we have received a lot of grant money for that. A lot of the road projects also are paid for through the Chapter 90 funds that we get through the state. And we've done some of our own share also with those projects. And with the 2020 coming up, there's been a concerted effort within the departments to submit various projects that would benefit the community with regards to enhanced tourism or areas that the community has felt have been very important within the downtown or the waterfront area that they want to improve access and improve, the the tourism factor, but also to improve it for the community at large, because it's something that they're going to be living with, as long as they've lived in this community. So a lot of those projects have been submitted to the town manager and myself and have been presented to the Capital Improvement Committee, and every year they get ranked, and we try to find as many funding sources as we can to support those projects. To get done. Some of them we've started at Burial Hill, Stevens Field, the 1820 restoration for the Town Hall complex, the Water Street Promenade project, Water Street Bridge project. So there is a lot going on, and I know the traffic has been a little crazy, but we work hard to make these improvements to benefit the community in a whole. In the long run, it'll get better.
And certainly that Water Street Promenade project, it's been highly visible, and I've enjoyed, despite the traffic, I've enjoyed seeing it come to fruition. We're taping this in the summer of 2014, and just last night when I went down to the Water Street, I noticed some benches appeared on some of the sidewalks that occurred, and I was just thinking, what a nice living space it's going to be for people to be able to walk and relax and enjoy.
Yes, I think it's going to be a lot more, walking friendly, biking. They're trying to incorporate some of the biking paths that come up through North Plymouth into the downtown area. So they're working hard to try to create that positive atmosphere. Yeah.
Now, we talked earlier a little bit about the budget, and when we have a town meeting on the first Saturday in April in the spring, and we come to Article 7, which is the budget, and it's all there, all laid out, but it doesn't just happen. I mean, when do you start building the budget, and what's the process?
We start when town meeting finishes for the next year's budget.
1 year, okay.
Yeah. We always joke in our office that in the finance office, we're always working on 3 years at one time. We're working on the current fiscal year that we're in. We're closing out the prior fiscal year, which right now is fiscal 14. We're in fiscal 15, but now we're budgeting for fiscal 16. So in fiscal year terms, sometimes people don't understand that, but our year is July 1st through June 30th. It's not a calendar year. So we just started fiscal 15 July 1st. We started budgeting now for fiscal 16, which we will come to town meeting next spring in April of 2015 to vote that budget. So it's a process where I start looking at all the numbers, looking at all the revenue that's come in from the previous fiscal year, looking at expenditure trends in different areas to see what our budget needs are going to be for those items, coming up in the fiscal 16. So we start working on that right now. As I said earlier, we have a meeting in early September with the stakeholders to try to come up with what our budget guidelines are going to be.
When you talk about stakeholders, what do you mean?
Well, the school department, the meeting that we have with the advisory and finance, the board of selectmen, the town manager, the school committee, the school superintendent, to sort of go over.
You're saying they all have a stake in the...
Yeah, the stake in the budget process, and because what I'm reporting to them is what I think the parameters are that we can live within with regards to revenue sources, because we try to be conservative, but we try to make sure that we're taking in, as much local receipts as we can and other areas to try to fund the budget or to find grants or other revenue sources so that we know how much we have to is in the pot of money to spend. And we are always very cognizant of the tax rate, because we want to make sure that the impact to the taxpayer isn't going to be, is going to be within the parameters that we can increase the tax rate through the statute. So we look at all of those different areas to try to come up with what is that parameter that we have to live within. And then we start building the budget at that point in early September. And we put it together. The town manager recommends her budget to the Board of Selectmen in early December. And then in early January, the Board of Selectmen recommends their budget to the Advisory and Finance Committee. And then that's when Advisory and Finance Committee starts to meet with all the different departments and go over the budget that's been recommended. And they'll come up with a recommendation for town meeting that happens in the first weekend in April.
And how come some years we held off town meeting?
There's been, in the past, the state has really primarily been the reason for that in the past. We don't know exactly what our state aid is going to be until probably usually the last week of June in a particular year. So a lot of times they like to wait because they want to know what that number is. But I don't necessarily recommend that. I've tried not to, postpone town meeting to this, late spring or June because we never really know what that number is, and we can't have town meeting the last week of June.
No.
I'm like, I'd rather just vote the budget in the first weekend in April, and we can usually estimate almost exactly what we're going to get within a couple of percentage points. So we know what our state aid contribution is. And if we have to make any adjustments to that, we make them at the fall annual town meeting because it's nice we have that already
Now,
scheduled.
built in, right.
Yeah, so I mean, that's where we can make adjustments to the budget if we need to increase something or if we need to decrease something. So usually, and all the departments work very well together so that it can be communicated to them, oh, you know what, we're not getting this money, so we have to not spend this. So
They know that, the department heads know.
Yeah, I mean, they've been really good, so.
Well, I think it's much better to get away from postponing the annual and just having it the first week in April.
Yeah, I mean, I think for planning purposes, I think town meeting members appreciate that,
Right.
that they're not, having to come out, more than a few times a year. And for us also, it's very good, for planning purposes.
So you've had some new staff.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about the new treasurer.
We've had, as you know, Pam Bogatti is our new treasurer collector, but she used to be the budget analyst and advisory and finance committee secretary for a number of years. So everyone was quite familiar with her being at town meeting and being at all the advisory and finance committee meetings, but she's been promoted to treasurer collector because our longstanding treasurer collector, Ed McAferry, retired in April. And Pam has been stepped up to that position, and she's been doing a wonderful job. Even though she may not think she is, I think she sometimes feels like she's running around town hall with her head cut off because we're just getting through the season of selling transfer station passes and beach stickers and curbside and that kind of thing.
Busy time.
Yeah, very busy time. So, but she's doing a great job. I think she's going to be a great asset to that department. We're actually looking at improving our website and our online payment area, and Pam has been working with me on instituting that. So I think next year people are going to see some changes that I hope they're going to like. It's going to be a little bit more user-friendly, maybe to a point where they're not going to want to have to come to town hall to see us to pay something. They can pay it online, but we still have a lot of people who like to come into the building. But she's doing a great job. So because she left that position downstairs.
And let me just say that I've worked with her for years, as you know, and I found her to be very bright and very well prepared. So I don't know necessarily how she's doing in the new position, but I would be very surprised if she weren't very successful given her good track record with the Finance Committee.
I agree. She's going to be great. Yeah. So taking her place is Carrie Gillette, who just started a couple of weeks ago.
In early July 2014.
Yep. So she's just getting her feet wet, and she's had one advisory and finance committee under her belt, and we're going to be probably getting up to speed because we'll have fall town meeting coming up. The warrant closes the end of next week, so we'll be getting ready to schedule all of those hearings on the different articles and in working with you. But I think Kerry is going to do a great job. She's very personable. People really like her. She's familiar with Town Hall. She's come from another department within Town Hall, and she's also a Plymouth resident, so she's very familiar with the community and what people like and what services they want to see. So she's going to be a great fit, I think.
Good. Well, we'll have to have her on the show as well.
Yes.
After a few more weeks.
That's right. Yeah.
So, Lynne, you've told us a lot about your professional life. What about your personal life? What do you like to do when you're not working as the Director of Finance?
Well, when I'm not working, I spend a lot of time with my family. My son he's actually just got out of the Marines and has just moved back home, so he's living at home and starting to attend school in September, and trying to put his life together on what he wants to do. But he's been very successsul in the Marines and enjoyed it. I'm just glad that he's home.
Safe.
And not there anymore. Yes.
Right. Where was he?
He did 2 tours in Afghanistan, but he was stationed in Camp Lejeune down in North Carolina. So he was, fairly close to home, being on the East Coast and everything. But it's nice to have him home in Massachusetts. Yes. And my daughter, she's a senior in high school, so we're just starting that college tour experience and looking at what she wants to do. So I spend a lot of time helping her and working on that. We live in Bridgewater, so it's local to the Plymouth. We spend a lot of time in Plymouth, coming here on weekends and doing things. Spend a lot of time visiting family down the Cape, from the Cape, so spend time doing that. I like to read, so I do a lot of reading, and like to watch sports like baseball and football and that kind of thing. Good. So, yeah.
Oh, good. Well, if people wanted to contact you, Lynne, how would they do that?
Well, they can contact me at Town Hall. Right now, we're in the lower level of Town Hall, so anytime someone can come in, they can come in and visit me. My door is open. My phone number is 508-747-1620, extension 177. They can reach me by going to our website and going to the finance department. My email address is on there, but it's also lbarrett@townhall.plymouth.ma.us. But I'm always available if anyone has a question regarding how things work, or if they're having an issue with one of the finance departments, they're welcome to call me and talk to me about it.
And Lynne, we often don't think of taxpayers as customers, but what would you say would be your philosophy, the philosophy of the town, regarding being available to our customers?
Oh, it's our number one priority, is to be available to the customer, to always treat them with respect and courtesy. Anything that we can do to help them or assist them to understand anything that's going on is what we're there for. So I try to instill that in all of my departments, and I think that the Plymouth community is well deserving of that respect. So.
Well, on that note, thank you, Lynne, so much for being on the show.
You're welcome.
This concludes the first half of this presentation of Plymouth Profiles. Please stay tuned for our second half of our show, when we welcome another guest, Walt Powell, who is here to speak with us today. Please stay tuned. Thank you.
Help us build and have some fulfilling fun at the same time. We are Habitat for Humanity of Greater Plymouth, and we volunteer to build homes for deserving families. What a big difference you can make in people's lives, and have a life-changing experience for yourself by helping build decent, affordable housing. We need good people like you to join us. For more information about Habitat for Humanity of Greater Plymouth or our Restore, please visit our website.
The Plymouth Center for the Arts, located in the historic Russell Library and Linden's Building, was transformed by volunteers into handsome galleries where art is enjoyed by visitors throughout the year. The Guild's annual juried art show, the New England Watercolor Society's exhibit, and the Fine Art of Photography show are all annual events. In addition to the art on the walls, our artists share poetry readings, jazz concerts, as well as classes in painting, sculpture, pottery, and more. Please visit our website for more information and join us as we share this treasure with our community.
I'd like to welcome you back to this edition of Plymouth Profiles. And I'd like to specifically thank Ken Bukes, who is in the studio helping to produce this show, dealing with all of the technical aspects that I certainly couldn't handle without him. So Ken, thank you for this show and for every other show that you do for Plymouth Profiles. And for this part of the segment, we're going to be joined by a relatively newcomer to the community. I'm delighted to have from the Mayflower Society, Walter Powell. Walter, welcome.
Thank you, Steve. What a pleasure to be here.
And Walter, I'm particularly delighted to have you as a guest because you may or may not recall, but when we first met, when you came to Plymouth, you told me that prior to coming to Plymouth, you watched one of these shows.
That's right.
And I was very impressed and surprised that being out of state, that you would pick up one of these shows and watch it. So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, as I was offered the position by the Mayflower Society, I was very curious to learn more about the community in particular. And like most people, started looking at the websites, doing a Google search, found your program. And the other reason, frankly, was I learned a little bit more about the Church of the Pilgrimage, where my wife and I now happen to be attending, and saw that you were very active there, saw an interview with you, and learned a little bit more about town meeting. And it was very helpful, very helpful. So I felt, in a sense, like I'd gotten to know something without having met you in person.
And of course, the other thing we found is that we have something in common with your background and mine. So tell us a little bit about your background, your education, where you attended school, where you have lived.
Yes. Well, you know, I'm smiling because, of course, our immediate connection is Gettysburg, the community where I spent 35 years of my career, including a long stretch as the Director of Planning and Preservation, and got to know the folks at Gettysburg College quite well, the faculty there, some of the administrators.
Some of my professors.
Exactly. But prior to that, actually, my early years were spent here in New England. I grew up in Connecticut and Western Mass. My father was a public school teacher at the time, and we lived in Windsor Locks, Connecticut, then Southwick, Massachusetts. When I was in high school, we moved to Western Pennsylvania, where my father took a job as a professor at Slippery Rock University.
I know Slippery Rock.
Slimy Stone, as it's sometimes called, or Rocky Stone. And I went to undergraduate school there in the history department, a field that I came to love very much. And from there went on to Kent State University in Ohio, which I think a lot of people know, especially the older generation, as the school where the shootings took place in May of 1970, our generation. I went to graduate school there, got my PhD in English with a focus on early American studies, New England studies. And then, frankly, Steve, I was casting about for work. You know, it's the early 1980s. The job market was terrible. Thankfully, my wife, Sue, was gainfully employed teaching in the public school system in Adams County as a health and PE teacher north of Gettysburg. So I was faced with the dilemma, do I just look anywhere or do I try to find something right where I'm located? And we both loved the community, became increasingly involved in the community. And the long and the short of it was I parlayed my love of the community as a municipal employee working for local government. But at the same time, doing a lot of volunteer work, serving on the boards of organizations like the Adams County Historical Society, active with social service agencies that provided direct help to low, moderate income people. And so really got to know the community very well and felt that was very rewarding, you know, mixing up working, taking my history degree and parlaying it in a local community so that I sort of learned the multiple dimensions of life in a small town. And that really is what intrigued me about Plymouth. I mean, I'd been here as a kid. In fact, fondly, my first memory of Plymouth was getting a free felt hat at Pilgrim Hall when they were offering those Thanksgiving weekend. We came up here from Western Mass, and ironically enough, Jim Baker, of course, who everyone in Plymouth knows, says I was handing out the hats that time. So I very likely handed you that felt hat. And we came up to Plymouth a number of times, loved it here, and when the General Society put out the notice they were looking for a full-time executive director more than a year ago, it looked very interesting to me. It was at a point in my career where I thought, I'm ready for a change. My wife was ready for a change, and the prospect of coming to a community that is still a tourist town, but still a small town with a great history and being on the water was a wonderful lure.
One other connection that we've also noted is that when I was at Gettysburg College, I knew about the Eisenhower House, the battlefields, certainly many of the tourist attractions. But I later came to understand that the Wax Museum that was in Gettysburg, that was formerly in Plymouth, were under the same owner.
Yes. The late Leroy Smith, who I got to know well when he was still alive. He owned multiple. Now, there's a story of a man who started with nothing right after World War II. He was a pilot stateside, and he started a small news business in Gettysburg in the 1950s that took off into an empire that included souvenirs, museums, the bus tour, of course, the Wax Museum. And I didn't know about the Plymouth connection until, ironically, we were here on vacation on a very hot summer in 1993. My kids were still young, and we went to the Wax Museum out of interest. And my daughter, who was then just 7, didn't want to have anything to do with it. She didn't want to go inside. She was terrified at the idea of seeing wax figures. My son and my wife thought, okay, we'll go in. And the staff there couldn't have been nicer. They just took my daughter, Sally, under their wing and effectively said, we'll watch her while you go through. And I found out, of course, later that there was the direct Gettysburg link. And in a sort of a humorous postlude, after the Wax Museum closed, those wax figures, many of them went back to Gettysburg. And I was in the process of restoring the Gettysburg Railroad Station, working as the director at the time of that project. And we were looking for wax mannequins that we might be able to use. And one of them was a mannequin that had been Elder Brewster. And we're taking Elder Brewster and putting Civil War era clothes on him to use him as a station agent. So I think about that, a little humor there.
So you end up in Plymouth. Tell us a little bit about your position at the Mayflower Society.
Yes. Well, the Mayflower Society, of course, is a national organization headquartered here in Plymouth, has 52 state societies that are all separate, independent, have their own officers, charter, meetings, websites. 50 states, the District of Columbia, and Canada are all considered societies. And about 2 years ago, they took a good hard look at the organization, their nonprofit status, their operations, and concluded that they needed a director here full-time. They did a thorough organizational assessment, and based on that, they decided to make some significant changes. One of them initially was to bring an interim director on board to sort of pave the way, and then to do a national search for a full-time executive director. So it has been an interesting transition. I was hired both to be the director of the organization, but at the same time to manage a local staff, to make us much more visible to the Plymouth community, to let people know that we're not a private club, that our facilities are open to the public, to start developing programs, to very much plug into Plymouth's 2020 planning as a national organization, to see what more we can do, both to be a part of that, but also as an organization to see what we want to do for 2020, to see how we can improve our organization, improve services to our members, a number of things. So it's been a learning curve for me, very much so, learning the culture of the organization, getting to know the staff locally, the history of the operation here, and to start to implement some of the changes that our Board of Governors wants.
So I know that the legal name has to do with Society of Mayflower Descendants, the General Society.
The General Society Mayflower Descendants is the legal name, our corporate name, but of course our common name is the Mayflower Society.
And so people who are involved are people that descended from the Mayflower?
Yes, you know, this is interesting. The question I often get is, am I a descendant? And my response is, no, I'm not, as far as I know. And some of the staff say, well, wait until we do some digging.
There you go.
But to be a member, you have to be a descendant to be able to prove your lineage from one of the Mayflower passengers. And that process starts essentially for most people at the state level. They go through their state societies, submit an application to the state historian of the respective state they live in, and after being reviewed initially, it's then forwarded, if it seems to be fairly complete, it's forwarded to us at the national office. We're the ones who ultimately approve the membership, so that's our most important function, to approve an application to determine if the lineage has been accurately and adequately proven, and then from there the person becomes a member and becomes active in both the state and the national society. But we have found, of course, I think like any organization that's interested in ancestry, so much has changed in recent years. More and more people are wired into the internet, so they're using organisms like Ancestry.com, doing their own research, submitting applications based on what they've pulled off the internet. And that's both a blessing and a curse. A blessing because it's increased the level of interest in Ancestry, but it also increases the probability for error, pulling up information that needs to be verified. And the other side of that is, there is no other than being proven to be a descendant. Backgrounds are so broad, and now with the changes in family composition, it's just amazing what comes in from day to day. So that's both a challenge and an interesting part of how the ancestry business, if you will, is changing.
So in Plymouth, we have a lot of people that are well known to have links. Ben Brewster, former town meeting member, Wrestling Brewster, town meeting member, the Withingtons, a lot of families in the Chiltonville area. But would it be fair to say that the largest number of members come from Plymouth, and in terms of a state, come from Massachusetts?
In terms of our national organization, yes, the largest membership is the Massachusetts Society with around 4,000 members, and then New York, Connecticut come close behind, the New England states having a large number. California, Florida, Texas have very large memberships.
Being large states?
Yes, yes. But I think, actually, I thought where you were going with that question, Steve, was that probably a large number of Plymouth residents who either are descendants or think they are descendants have probably never walked in our doors.
That happens too.
Yes, yes. Either because, they've just, I'm a descendant, why would I want to prove it?
Right.
Or, what's in it for me, even if I do prove it? And I think those are valid questions, very good questions that we're still wrestling with ourselves. What do we offer to a person who becomes, if you will, a card-carrying member? And other than just holding a certificate or feeling that sense of kindred, that sense of family, what else can we do? Why else should it be important? And I think part of the answer to that is to the degree that we can offer some useful services, programs, help people better network with others. But even bigger to me than that, Steve, is the sense of why is that ancestry relevant? What's relevant about the story? And I love the comment I think that Jim Baker made a few years ago, which is as you know, the Pilgrims in a sense are the spiritual ancestors of so many immigrants to this country, including my father's family, my mother's family. And that, I think, is where the real connection lies. To see the extraordinary sacrifice that they made and to realize that, while it's extraordinary in itself, is not unique, that other immigrants have done the same thing, the same struggles, to an end which we all hope is much better than where they came from.
And we're taping this in the summer of 2014. And just this week, I keep hearing on the news that people in positions of governmental office are making statements about we're a nation of immigrants, and we all, except for Native Americans, have come from immigrant families. And it's such an issue nationally right now that, you're right, that to figure out from where we came. Tell us a little bit about, you talk about the services that you offer. What about the property? Tell us about the property.
Yes. Well, we have just about 2 acres here in Plymouth. Of course, I think Plymouthians know well the big white house, which now is called the Mayflower Society House, but historically was called the Winslow House. And that house was built in 1754.
Tell us where it's located.
It's located right on the corner of North and Winslow Streets. The address technically is 4 Winslow Street. And, it overlooks the harbor. I think many people probably recognize the balustrades and the cupola up on top of the house, or the big porch out front.
So as you go down North Street heading towards the water.
So to your immediate left, just before you start going down the hill. Whether you go down Winslow with a sharp left or you go straight down North Street to the corner there, water. And we view it as our window to Plymouth. It's, in a way, our alumni house. So many of our members feel invested in the house, have given things, have visited it many times. And so we're thinking of it in terms of how we can make that more visible to Plymouthians and to visitors here. And with that in mind, last Christmas, we had a World War II themed open house because, I noticed the first thing when I came on board last year, looking at the history of the house, the Mayflower Society bought it because it was threatened with demolition. Plymouth has lost, as you well know, Steve, so many important landmarks.
Yes.
And in the late 30s, the owners of the property couldn't afford to pay the taxes. The talk was it would be torn down. And the National Society really didn't have a lot of money at that time, but felt they needed to do something. So they bought it, and when they bought it, it was December 1941. So what are you going to do? Well, the logical thing to them was to make it of service to the Plymouth community, and they turned it over to the Red Cross chapter here in Plymouth. And for 4 years, it was the Plymouth Red Cross headquarters. It was a wonderful opportunity last December to have Plymouth residents come in and reminisce about their time in the house during the war, for veterans to come in and reminisce about their experiences during the war. And we just had some wonderful intersections of stories of people. And for me personally, for example, I learned about some of our docents who had very personal connections to the Second World War. One, Marty Wood Finnegan, who lost a brother who was killed in the Mediterranean.
Now, when you mention a docent, just to explain to our audience, what's a docent?
Yes, we have 6 house docents who give tours, who love the house, love it to death, really, headed by Judy McDonald, who's a longtime resident of Plymouth and who is our head curator docent, and 5 other ladies that work very closely with her. It's open every day of the week from April through October, and they give tours daily. Hence the term docent.
And you were talking Marty Finnegan.
Yes, well, Marty lost her brother, and she knew very little about the circumstances of his death. It turned out he was on a ship that was torpedoed by the Germans, and everyone was lost. And at the time, the War Department kept that quiet for understandable reasons. And so when we compared notes, I was able to find a bit more information about that for her, and it was just another reminder of how close the events of the war still are to us that many years later.
So if someone wanted to contact you or the Mayflower Society, how would they do that?
Well, several ways. They could call me directly. Our main phone number is area code 508-746-3188, and they can reach me at extension 21. They can also look at our website and pull up our phone number, our web address, which is themayflowersociety.org. But I think first and foremost, many people just like to call, and we're happy to talk to people on the phone.
So you have members who are descended from Mayflower, and how do they go about registering or participating?
Well, first and foremost, those who are interested in becoming members we get occasional calls actually asking that directly, and we refer them usually to the state societies, to the state historian. Each of the state societies, like Massachusetts, has a website, a state historian with a phone number and an email address, and that's usually the best way to start to make inquiry with the Mass Society. For example, the state historian is Jay Lucas. Then from there, that application, if they choose to submit it, would be processed and forwarded to us. And normally at that point, then, if we have any questions, we get back directly to the applicant, either by email or by phone. The biggest challenge, of course, is trying to get through applications as quickly as we can. We get about 1,600 a year on average. And right now, because we're in a transition with our staff, it's taking us longer to get through those than it had in the past. And of course, people are always in a hurry to get things approved, and they want to have it done yesterday. So.
And is there any opportunity for any type of affiliate membership for people who are not descended from the Mayflower? I'm
very glad you asked that, because we've just recently adopted a strategic plan, like any organization, and we are actively considering, and I'm quite certain within the next year we'll be doing just that, creating an affiliate membership, a friends organization. There are really so many people that have the passion and enthusiasm for the story, but just may not have the lineage per se. So that's in process.
And how do you interface with the other organizations in Plymouth, such as, you mentioned the Pilgrim Hall Museum, or what comes to mind, the Plantation?
Well, I'm really pleased that in the last year since I've been here, all of the organizations have been very gracious in opening up their doors. One of the first people I met, other than Lee Hartman at Town Hall, the town planner, my instinct was to go to the Town Hall, was Donna Curtin here of the Plymouth Antiquarian Society, and then Ellie Donovan at the Plantation, and Peggy Baker when she was out, interim director at Pilgrim Hall, outgoing. Since that time, I've joined the Plymouth Historical Alliance, the local network of historical organizations that meets quarterly, and was honored to be selected president for this current year. So we meet on a quarterly basis and informally at other times to talk about interests and to plan for mutual programming. Also, Plymouth 400 Inc. I serve on the board of Plymouth 400 Inc. as the Mayflower Society's representative, and very keenly interested then in the initiative that the 400 Inc. is working on, as you well know. So the short answer is trying to get to know the individuals and organizations better, but in the longer term, finding ways we can collaborate actively, financially and through staffing and through shared programming and any number of initiatives.
When we talk about shared programming, is there any thought about coordinated programming, such as having in several of the historical sites a similar theme? I mean, you mentioned last Christmas you did World War II, but I mean, would there be any thought to having something that would be somewhat coordinated throughout the town?
Well, you know, interestingly enough, we've got coming up this September the first marathon reading of Plymouth Plantation by William Bradford, which will be at First Parish Church on September 18th and 19th. And that's a joint initiative of the Plymouth Historical Alliance and what we hope will be an annual event in Plymouth leading into 2020. Three of us a few months ago, Patrick Brown of Pilgrim Hall and Donna Curtin from the Antiquarian Society and I went up to look at the manuscript, the Bradford manuscript in Boston, which belongs in Plymouth.
It sure does, you're right.
You know, it's hidden away. It's in special collections.
Boston,
it's at the State House and the State Library, where it has been since 1897, you know, when it was reclaimed from Great Britain and brought back with a great deal of ceremony. And it was on display in the State Library for many years. And of course, as you know, you just don't put objects like that on public display, exposed to direct light, all of those things anymore. So the Commonwealth put it away. This past year, they invested an extraordinary amount of money to completely restore the document and digitize it so that you can access Bradford's original manuscript digitally and make it still available to view by appointment. But we would love to see it on permanent display here, and I think probably the consensus is Pilgrim Hall would be the logical place. So I'm putting in a little plug now, maybe a little political plug, that we need to lobby for 2020 to see what we can do to convince the powers that be that William Bradford needs to come home.
What are some of the member organizations of the Historical Alliance?
They include, of course, notably Plymouth Plantation, Pilgrim Hall, the Antiquarian Society, the Jenny Museum here in Plymouth. We also look around us at the Public Library and its Special Collections Room is another member of the Alliance. We're overdue, frankly, to invite the Wampanoag representation in our alliance, and that question came up, so we'll be looking to transition and have a representative on our committee. And we are potentially open to any the Cordage Museum in Cordage Park. The Plymouth Cordage Museum is also part of our alliance.
Wondering if any of the churches would be appropriate. You mentioned First Parish, of course, tracing roots back, as well as the Church of Pilgrimage, having a lot of historical roots. I
have, of course, the shorter memory because I've only been here a year, and some of my colleagues can certainly elaborate on that in much greater detail. The 1749 Courthouse, I think these are all organizations that have or have been invited to be participants, so there is certainly no cutoff that I'm aware of anyway.
So what are some of the future goals or plans of the Mayflower Society?
Well, as a lineage organization, you can well imagine that one of our fascinations is with the remains of those pilgrims who died that first winter, who were buried in Coles Hill. And a project that we've adopted in recent years, we're calling the Coles Hill Anthropological Project, which is we would like very much, and again, we know this is a delicate topic, but we'd like very much to revisit the remains of those pilgrims that are entombed under the granite sarcophagus in Coles Hill, a sarcophagus that we paid for as a society in 1920, and to have those remains forensically examined, much as the remains at Jamestown have been examined, and so much has been learned about those early settlers. So we are now in this stage of the project in 2014 working towards the hopeful goal of being able to examine those remains and learn more about those men and women who died that first winter. We're also very excited, frankly, about the initiative that Plymouth Plantation has been working on with UMass, the ongoing archaeological project to discover the site of the first meeting house stockade up on Burial Hill, and we're very excited about the potential that has to tell us a lot more about what early Plymouth looked like.
And you probably heard in the earlier segment that Lynne Barrett, Director of Finance, mentioned about the funding for one of the capital projects being at Burial Hill.
Yes, that $500,000 grant. I remember reading about it shortly after it was given. Absolutely supportive of that. Some of our members have been volunteers for the recently formed Friends of Burial Hill. You asked also, of course, in the context of our support for 2020, the Pilgrim Progress is based at our house. Their collection of costumes are housed at the Society House, and we're very excited about their being named one of the region's 10 most popular attractions in Yankee Magazine this year. And that's a great asset and a very historical legacy of the town of Plymouth.
It's also a great way to involve the community. I mean, so many of us over the years participated at one time or another. I can remember marching with my children when they were much younger. But it's a great opportunity, great experience, and I think it's one of the nicest things that occur at Thanksgiving, the Pilgrim Progress in Plymouth.
And I think as I think about that too, we want very much for Plymouthians to know that we are open to Plymouthians. We're an open society. I mean, yes, to become a member, there's a obvious link that needs to be proven, but our services at our library, our house, are open to the public daily, and to Plymouth residents, it's free. So we hope to see more people that just want to make inquiries, just curious, to stop by, and we're happy to see them.
And something that I hadn't really thought about is it's also a venue for functions.
That's right. In fact, just in the past month, we've had both a big class reunion, had a wedding reception, and at the beginning of this month, we hosted the Plymouth Pilgrims, the baseball club, for a big annual picnic, and that was a great deal of fun. In fact, they will be, having a family night even as we're taping, which we're involved as a co-sponsor for, and we're delighted to do it.
So a wide range of activities. Now, the various organizations in the 50 states, how do they keep going? I mean, I remember recently we were talking and you mentioned kind of randomly that there's the organization in South Dakota. It just surprised me.
Yes. In fact, one of our newest employees is coming in from South Dakota, but each of the state organizations meets annually, sometimes more than once a year. Many produce newsletters, have individual meetings and functions. They're surprisingly active and offer scholarships to schools, publications, so a wide variety of things.
Okay. Walter, when you're not doing Mayflower Society, what do you do in your free time?
Well, I love to travel. Regionally, being back in New England has been great. Historic sites, of course, first and foremost. Read. Scuba diving, I think some people are surprised to find I love to get in the water, under the water. So I've had a different view of Plymouth since I moved here.
Great. Well, wonderful. Well, thank you for being here.
Thank you for inviting me. It was a real pleasure being
wonderful
on.
to hear about you and about the Mayflower Society. And this completes this presentation of Plymouth Profiles. Please join us again for future presentations. Good day.